Wife have been doing Ratio Christi for quite a while. We started back, I think it was 2000, maybe 13, 12, something like that. Doing stuff at Queen's University. Then we went and helped out Devin and Melissa for a while. We moved to Colorado, and then now we're back. So we really love Ratio Christi. We love what they're about. We love what they do. So thanks again for letting us be part of that. Tonight we'll talk about miracles. But I want it to try to be as interactive as possible. So what would you say if miracles weren't possible? What kind of impact would that have on our beliefs as Christians? If miracles literally were impossible, what would that mean for Christianity?
Thought being impossible is what made them a miracle.
Sorry?
I thought being impossible was what made them a miracle.
You could say that. That'd be one way of. You could say that. Most people wouldn't. Yeah. Most theologians wouldn't say that. But yeah, go ahead.
I would say that if miracles were both physically and metaphysically impossible, period, then God wouldn't exist and Christianity would be a moot point.
Why wouldn't God exist?
Because God's what performs miracles.
Couldn't he exist without performing miracles?
If miracles were impossible, then God wouldn't be in existence. Now, I'm not saying if miracles never happened, but I'm saying if miracles were impossible.
Sure, if miracles weren't possible, why would that entail God not existing, though?
Because the only entity capable of performing miracles is God.
Okay, I'm an entity that's capable of, say, writing a book. If I don't write a book, does that mean I don't exist?
No, but if books were impossible to exist, that means that you wouldn't be in existence.
Okay, I will have to think about that because I don't think that.
I would say that just because something doesn't exist doesn't mean it's impossible to exist. You know what
I think he's saying, since God is all powerful, you were just saying that miracles are impossible, then you would be thus saying an all powerful being couldn't exist.
Yeah, I don't think that follows. So I agree with you completely that Christianity would be false, right? Christianity is predicated on the fact that miracles have happened, right? Obviously, we talked about the resurrection. If the resurrection didn't happen, even Paul says we are of most men the most pitiable. We are false witnesses about God, right? So if miracles are not possible, never happened, Christianity is false. I don't think it follows that doesn't exist, but Christianity doesn't exist, or it is false. It's just a set of beliefs made up by men.
Would you say that would disprove theism, though, or monotheism?
No, you could be a deist.
So we're not saying that God. Well, even deists say that God created the world, right?
Yeah, he created the world.
Wouldn't that be a miracle?
Depends on what they mean by that.
So it would just seem that if we're saying God doesn't have to do miracles, but if we're saying he couldn't do miracles, then it would seem like that would be a radically different kind of being.
Sure. It would not be the God of Christian theism, right? It wouldn't be the God of
monotheism, would it?
Maybe it depends on.
Okay, let's say it wouldn't be classical theism.
No, it would not be classical theism.
Okay.
Yeah. So when I'm saying God wouldn't exist, we're not defining God as the God of classical theism. We're using the term generally. Now, if you meant the God of classical theism doesn't exist, I think you'd have to insert a couple more premises to maybe make that case. But I think you could at least make that case. But just as it stands, it wouldn't follow that God doesn't exist, right? But it would follow that Christianity isn't true, okay? So it's kind of important that miracles are possible. Have you guys heard of any objections to the claim that miracles are possible? Yeah.
I've got a different question. Are you using the words possible, or the word impossible and or possible, and interchanging that with more of a phrase of have happened or have not happened?
No, because something might be actually have happened, or something may not have actually happened, but be possible to have happened.
I might be mishearing you then, because it seems to me that's what's happening.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I know David Hume thought that the laws of physics were immutable, but I don't know why he thought that.
Okay.
So, Devin, you remember this, right? I put you on the spot, I'm sorry.
So I think David Hume. I don't know if he thought it was impossible. Okay, him and Emmanuel Kant.
Right. So there's people who would interpret Hume as saying, look, I'm not saying that they're necessarily impossible. I'm saying even if one happened, you couldn't know it. So that's maybe a softer reading of Hume, right? But there were people who did say that. Spinoza, for example, and I'll bring him up in a little bit. Spinoza did say that. The laws of nature are immutable and God cannot change them. But before we get into that, what is a miracle? Like, what is your description or definition of what a miracle is? Yeah.
More loosely, any action that God Himself performs.
Okay.
Say more loosely, any action that God makes possible and or performs, but more strictly, any action that humans can't perform that God performs.
Okay. Yep. Anyone want to add to? Yeah.
An action that we cannot understand.
Okay. So, there's something like quantum physics and some things that happen in quantum mechanics that we don't necessarily understand. Even physicists don't seem to understand. Would we say that the events that take place in the quantum realm are miracles? I'm just asking. Okay, I'll give you guys, I need to step it back here a little bit. I like the Socratic method. I like, when I teach, I like engaging people. I like asking you a question, and just because I ask a follow-up question, I'm not trying to make anybody look silly or anything. I think one of the best ways to learn is to have an answer and have a dialogue to where I follow it up with a further question. I've had several interviews like that where they'll ask you a question, they'll ask you a question, and they'll ask you a question, and then they just want to know where you're at so they can maybe adjust the direction they're going too. So
He spent many years smashing me doing this.
So miracle. Would the strange world of quantum mechanics, would that be a miracle? All of the behaviors that take place there?
No, not if they're repeatable.
If they're repeatable, okay. So miracle would be contrasted with
May not be repeatable.
Okay, they may not be or just aren't?
May not be.
May not be, okay. Any additions to that? Yeah.
I think they have to be direct acts of God.
Okay.
Or God acting through someone still with divine intervention.
Good, okay. Yeah, did you have another?
I was just going to go off of what Christian already said. The miracle is just an act of God. Maybe not, I would say usually something we can't understand, but not necessarily something we can't understand.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we want to just kind of put some of those pieces together. I want to talk a little bit about how not to define a miracle. How to not define a miracle. A miracle is not defined as a miracle or an event that science can't explain. Why might that be? Why do we not want to define a miracle as just some event that science can't explain?
Do you mean that it's impossible for science to explain it, or just that it hasn't?
Hasn't.
Okay.
Why might that be a problem?
Sure, we could explain it.
Right, and then if we do explain it with some kind of naturalistic explanation, is it still a miracle? Not really, not by any definition that we typically understand a miracle to be, right? So we don't want to define it as just something that science can't explain. Yeah, I brought that up. A miracle is an extremely amazing or an amazingly unlikely event. What's wrong with that, saying that it's just extremely amazing or an unlikely event? Yeah.
That would make true miracle. That would what's the word I'm looking for? I want to say dequantify. That's not really the word. Diminish the value of true miracles and make miracles seem much more common than they actually are. I would say.
Okay. Yeah.
There would be no distinction between an act of God and an act of some demon.
Of some demon, right? Or even potentially of some natural event, right? Because aren't there unlikely natural events? Winning the lottery is pretty unlikely, but it happens, right? We wouldn't say that's a miracle. So yeah, how would we delineate between unlikely or extremely amazing natural events, or if you believe in the demonic, as Christians do, that they have some kind of influence, could be very amazing or unlikely. How would you know that that's not also a miracle? Okay, good. What about anything God does in the world? What might be problematic about defining it that way?
Because God is omnipotent, and so to some degree, everything that happens is by God's power.
Okay, sure. Everything like what? Like what are we thinking that's not a miracle?
Like a thunderstorm.
Oh, okay,
The very existence of everything itself.
okay. Yeah, and if you think about theological terminology, there's all sorts of different theological terminology that we fail to distinguish between if we think that just anything that God does is a miracle. Well, what about inspiration? What about providence? What about grace? What about revelation? These are all acts of God, but we don't typically call those things miracles per se. Maybe you do, but then you probably need to make some kind of case for why you would say any act of God is a miracle. Okay?
Because if everything's a miracle, then nothing's a miracle, right?
Well, if any act of God is a miracle, well then what's to distinguish a miracle from providence?
Right.
Or a miracle from revelation?
Yeah.
Now, you could maybe make a conceptual distinction between them and then just say, well, providence, revelation, the infusion of grace are kinds of miracles. You could say that. I mean, that's possible. I don't know, like typically in the literature, if that's the way people think about it. Tend to not. But you need to at least be able to make those distinctions between the actions of God in the world. So, any questions about to so far? No, okay. So, this is how apologists typically define miracles. It's a miracle is a non-repeatable counter instance to the law of nature. It's an event that occurs in the course of human history, but it occurs not in accordance with the normal ordinary operation of the laws of nature and is an act of God. So the source is God. It's some kind of non-repeatable thing that is not in keeping with the laws of nature. And technically this is actually more of a description of a miracle than a strict definition of a miracle. So we have normal event A. I drop a ball, and in this instance, it falls to the ground at an acceleration of 9.8 meters per second squared. Do it again, it happens. Do it again, it happens. Do it again, it happens. Oh, wait. Then I drop the ball, and it flies upward. Right? Drop the ball, drop the ball, drop the ball. Right? So these are instances that are counterexamples to the normal behavior of objects that operate according to natural laws. Okay? So let's talk about Spinoza, because Spinoza gives this sort of abstract reasoning for why miracles are impossible. He says the will of God is identical with the laws of nature. A miracle is a violation of the laws of nature. Necessarily, God's will is unviable. Therefore, miracles cannot happen. Okay? So, he says, laws of God, the will of God is identical with the laws of nature. Then he defines a miracle as a violation of the laws of nature. What do you guys see as the problem with this argument? Yeah.
I would define the premise one as incorrect.
Why?
Because the will of God isn't necessarily identical with the laws of nature. The laws of nature don't cover many of the metaphysical aspects of the will of God. They don't cover any of the metaphysical aspects of the will of God. No part of nature you can't like go out into the forest, look around, and suddenly the Bible's in your head. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I don't know where he got that from.
Okay.
Doesn't make sense.
Sure. Yeah. Definitely, it's worth asking the question, all right, Spinoza, why do you think that? Why do you think God's will is identical with the laws of nature? Yeah.
Well, I think both of those first two premises are wrong, because if God's will was his will was to create nature and have certain laws in effect, that doesn't mean that the laws of nature are his will, because if that were the case, then his will would have to be determined by the laws of nature, but they didn't exist until he decided to create them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Cool.
So the miracle is a violation, and obviously he's violated it many times by just creating the world, by raising people from the dead. Everything he's done in the guard's ear, everything he's done violates it. And yeah, he did things that are outside that realm, but that doesn't mean he violated or broke any rules. He just did what he had to do and did what he knew was right. So
Okay. Yeah. Anyone else want to? Yeah.
I'm not sure that even if the premises are right, that means the things we call miracles can happen. It seems like you could say, oh, the laws of nature include God doing the things that we call miracles, if those really are identical with His will.
Okay. So there's some, yeah, go ahead.
Now that what he said put something in my head. Who are we to decide what the laws of nature are even? Like, maybe a miracle isn't in violation of the laws of nature, but we just don't really know what the laws of nature actually are. Or maybe they are in violation of the laws of nature, or maybe they're only in violation of the laws of nature sometimes. Why would you define the laws of nature as? Like things like that.
Okay. We want to be careful about being too skeptical about our ability to know, say, scientific truths, too. So in responding...
Not everybody.
Yeah. No, I think what we want to do is, on the one hand, is we want to point out how is it that Spinoza is wrong, but we also want to do that in a way that doesn't make it so that we can't do science, right? We still want to be able to do science, right? And we still think that we have some knowledge of the world, and that knowledge of the world can give us the ability to draw generalized conclusions about the world. If I drop an object, in general, it falls to the earth at 9.8 meters per second squared. Water's boiling point temperature at certain elevation is 212 degrees Fahrenheit, right? We want to be able to make those kinds of generalizations. Spinoza specifically, I've heard some apologists say that Spinoza actually what's called begs the question or commits a logical fallacy here with the first premise, but it's actually not the case. Spinoza is not begging the question. Spinoza has an entire metaphysical position that attempts to justify this premise. What he says is that God is identical with being, or with he calls substance. So he's what's called a pantheist. He thinks that God is the world. That's why he doesn't make a distinction between God and the world. Is that the God and the world are really the same thing, and we're looking at different aspects of God when we look at the world. Okay? So fundamentally what's wrong with Spinoza is his underlying view of God. That's the problem. So we have to address his view of God, and that's a pretty abstract task. So we won't get into that. But I just want you to know that Spinoza presents this argument, and it's pretty influential because a lot of the following arguments against miracles still hold on to this. The laws of nature are fixed. The laws of nature are immutable. The laws of nature. This is a mantra that you hear over and over again throughout the history of thought from skeptics saying that miracles are impossible. Why? Because of this. Not the same metaphysical background, not even necessarily the same argument, but that idea seems to follow through, even all the way to Hume. Okay, so...
Couldn't you use, like with this particular argument, I'm sure back in his day it may not have been known, but so since the evidence has gotten better that the universe began to exist and isn't eternal, then that would kind of be problematic to say that God and the universe are identical or dependent on each other because...
For Spinoza?
Yeah, because the universe isn't eternal. It came into being.
Yeah,
so
I'm trying to think.
For the will of God and the laws of nature to be identical, then if the universe and the laws of nature came into being, then wouldn't that mean the will of God also would have came into being? If they're the same thing.
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure if Spinoza would have a problem with the universe coming into existence. I think he's a strong determinist, like about as strong as you can get. Things could not have happened otherwise. For Spinoza, everything that has happened of necessity. It could not have happened otherwise. So God's will is unchanging because everything happens of necessity. God's will is necessitated.
His will could exist apart from the laws of nature?
No.
See, so that would be the problem, though, because if the laws of nature aren't eternal, right, and they had a beginning, then that would require God would need a beginning as well, right? He would need a cause. Because if the laws are eternal, if they're interdependent, and the laws came into being, then why wouldn't God need to come into being?
Well, what I'm saying is I'm not sure if that would be a problem for Spinoza. So Spinoza is like, look, that we have to call God substance. Substance is that thing upon which nothing else depends, right? So there might be a problem for him in a finite use. Yeah, I'd have to think about that more. I'm not sure. Think about how Spinoza would take that, how he would respond to the kalam.
Yeah.
All right, so I bring this up. It's abstract, but I wanted to bring it up because I want you to know, where did this idea, this notion, it's not just Spinoza, but where did some of these ideas come from that say the laws of nature are like unbreakable, they cannot be broken? This is one place that comes from.
So it's pantheism.
Yeah, pantheism is, yes.
So you could say to some atheist who denies the miracles and say, well, your position would be kind of convincing, except it's too pantheistic.
Right, well, yeah, I mean, this is why the theistic arguments are so important.
Yeah.
Is because a lot of the arguments come down to, what is this God that you're talking about? Right? Because if I can just define God as anything, well, I can define God as identical with nature. Why not? If I don't have any constraints in terms of how I define God, and then my logic would follow, and miracles would be impossible because
It'd be hard to tell the difference between an atheist and a pantheist, then, right?
in terms of,
Well, if nature is the will of God, right? If they're the same thing, then how would you distinguish between
atheism.
right? How would you be able
Some forms of pantheism, I'm not sure. Yeah. I think some, especially Eastern forms of pantheism, seem to have more of this sense that there's something animating the world. That's not itself, like it's not strictly speaking identical with the world, right? That there's something animating the world that I don't know, maybe supervenes on the world or something, right?
Yeah. So
the definition of pantheism as strictly the world that's Spinoza.
Mm-hmm.
That's a God Einstein said he believed in, is the God of Spinoza. Okay, so do you guys see where that's coming from? This sort of the laws of nature are inviolable. They're unbreakable. He's a monist, but he does not want to go to the next slide. I broke it.
Do the arrow keys work?
You can try hitting the. Oh, no, never mind.
It work? Okay. So I gave you a summary that I won't read through that. So Aquinas, I wrote a paper actually contrasting Spinoza and Aquinas' view of substance. And Aquinas is like, dude, your problem is with your view of God, right? The way you view God is incorrect. It's novel and it's not right. He says substances don't have to exist necessarily. Substance refers to subjects that maintain identity through accidental change. God causes some things necessarily and some things conditionally. So Aquinas elaborates on this metaphysics that is in contrast to Spinoza, right? Now, Aquinas was before Spinoza, so he's not actually responding to Spinoza. But his system is much more elaborate, and it's a much more nuanced way of dealing with the nature of God. That doesn't require that God's will is identical with the laws of nature. Okay, I'll just point that out. So Aquinas is like, dude, stop talking about God like that. So we have another one, Voltaire. Has anybody heard of Voltaire? The French Revolution, right? He comes with this, basically says immutable laws cannot be violated, miracles are violations. Here again we see this influence as violations of immutable law. Therefore miracles are impossible. Miracles aren't breaking inviolable law or unbreakable laws or immutable laws unless you define the laws of nature as being immutable. Okay? What we've got today is usually a watered down version of this. They've jettisoned they've jettisoned the metaphysics of Spinoza, but kept this idea that the laws of nature are immutable and unchanging. So here we come to David Hume, who's probably the most famous objector to miracles being possible. He says, I flatter myself that I discovered an argument of a like nature, which, if just, will with the wise and learned be everlasting check to all kinds of superstitious delusion and consequently will be useful as long as the world endures. Man, who have you heard say something like that? That's a yeah. I've got an argument no one will ever be able to defeat until they do. So through experience, he says, our only guide in reasoning concerning matters of fact, it must be acknowledged that this guide is not altogether infallible, but in some cases apt to lead us into error. So a wise man therefore proportions his belief to the evidence. Okay? Pretty commonsensical. People are fallible. People can make errors in their thinking and reasoning. So we should proportion our belief to the evidence that supports the belief that we have. All probability then supposes an opposition of experiments and observations, where the one side is found to overbalance the other, and to produce a degree of evidence proportioned to the superiority. 100 instances or experiments on one side and 50 on another afford a double expectation of any event. Though 100 uniform experiments, with only one that is contradictory, reasonably beget a pretty strong degree of assurance. In all cases, we must balance the opposite experiments where they are opposite and deduct the smaller number from the greater in order to know the exact force of the superior evidence. Okay. Basically, he says, if you've got 100 cases of a rock falling to the ground and you have one counterexample, you believe that that was an anomaly and that the rest of this stuff is what you really should believe. You can have 99% certainty that when you drop a rock, it will fall to the ground if you only have one counter instance. Sorry? No. So, say normally in July or in June, you get above 20 inches of rain, right? And in support of that, you have 100 examples, contradicts 50 examples. So it didn't rain above 20 inches in June 50 times. So your certainty that in the future, in June, it'll above 20 inches, you'll get above 20 inches of rain is basically 50%. Okay? Fairly straightforward. Any questions on that? So when it comes to miracles, a miracle for Hume is by definition a rare occurrence. And if a wise man always proportions his belief to the evidence, he will always proportion his belief to the thing that occurs more frequently. And if you always proportion your beliefs to the things that occur more frequently, and miracles are by definition rare, occur less frequently, then even if miracles happened, the wise man doesn't believe them. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I think it's like, you can do that if you're looking for like an overlying principle in like science or something like that. But when it comes to miracles, I feel like it's a different type of, like, you can't treat a miracle like happening or not happening like you would a rock falling or not.
Why?
It's a different type of concept. It's
metaphysical in nature.
I guess what bothers me about it is like, I feel like for some things, like, you can, I'm trying to like kind of like put into words what I'm thinking, but I think he's like assuming that you have to look at everything in like a scientific manner, like everything's an experiment, where it's like you don't really have to do that. He's overstating his conclusion.
Well, what other means would you have, right? Now, just for disclosure, Hume's an empiricist, right? He thinks knowledge comes primarily through the senses.
Yeah, okay. But you still sense that the rock didn't fall down, like it went up, or that somebody rose from the dead, if we're going to use the example of Jesus, and like you see that. Mm-hmm. And so you can trust that because you do see it. It's not that like just because you see it one time doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Okay. So you're saying that Hume is wrong. It's not quite clear why you think he's wrong.
I know, it's like I'm having a hard time putting it into words,
yeah.
To be honest with you.
Sure, yeah.
I just know, like, from that argument, like, something's off about it, you know?
Sure, yep. Do you see the sort of intuitive plausibility of it, though? do you at least get like, okay, if miracles are by definition rare, and I should always proportion my belief to the things that happen with regularity, well then if to be wise, I shouldn't believe in miracles because they're rare. Does it make sense? Mm-hmm. Is it tough? Okay. So he says miracle is a violation of the laws of nature, and as firm and unalterable experience has established these laws of nature, the proof against any miracle from the very nature of the fact is as entire as any argument from experience can possibly be imagined. Again, not maybe a little overstated, but we get the point. Okay, so necessarily when we start talking about the resurrection, how many times does that happen? Once. It's not repeatable. Unless God decided to repeat it over and over, I guess. But it
Kind of two if you count Lazarus.
theologically, there's some differences between the raising of Lazarus and the resurrection of Christ.
Okay.
But if you want to not worry about that, you could lump them together. But yeah, even if you had two, even if you had 5 or 6 resurrections, he would still say, no, you don't really have adequate grounds to believe that. Because the remaining 99% of the people died, they didn't come back to life. That's what you proportion your belief to. Okay, I think we went over that. Then, yeah.
So they're saying that you proportion your belief to the one that's more common, therefore the miracles can't happen. Except what in that example, we're basically saying, all right, 99 people stayed dead, 1 person didn't stay dead. So then you would be 99% sure that someone would stay dead when they died.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's the 1% where it didn't. So you really can't completely throw out that it's impossible. You throw out that it's extremely unlikely.
Yeah, but he's fine with that. He's like, yeah, you shouldn't believe something if there's only a 1% chance that instance describes some kind of law. Right?
Yeah.
So you just say, yeah, that's just our situation. We're just in a situation where we only know things probabilistically. Yeah.
You mentioned it describing some kind of law. Did Hume think that a miracle would have to be something regular, like the law of gravity, if they were possible?
It's weird because he kind of talks that way. Yeah. He doesn't really, as far as I know, he doesn't make like this distinction between our knowledge of one-time events versus coming up with lots and lots of examples and abstracting a law from that.
So is his question not so much about whether or not it could happen, but whether or not it's like the way things happen, period?
So Hume's a skeptic. And Hume is dealing, I think, more with how do we know. Now, whether or not miracles actually happen, he might actually be agnostic about that. I'm not sure. But what he would say is, even if one happened, you couldn't justly believe it. Right? You couldn't assent to that truth that the resurrection happened. Because you have so many counterexamples, like overwhelming amounts of counterexamples. Right? Everyone dies, right? So you have this one anomaly. What better explains the anomaly? That all of these examples are wrong? Or that they don't tell us how nature acts? Or, and someone potentially made up this story about a resurrection from a long time ago? Or that miracle actually happened?
So when we say someone rose from the dead, is he misconstruing that as people always rise from the dead?
No, I think it's a one-time event that he would say you shouldn't believe that it happened. Because he's specifically referring to miracles even in the Christian scriptures.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
So he's saying belief is defined, like to believe, like that word belief is defined by like percentage, like the majority percentage of something happening. he's like tying together like how many times something has happened with like believable or
Yep. It's a quantity of observation and uniformity of experience.
Okay, so in order to defeat his argument, one way you could do it is to like show how that is not a necessary like connection.
Okay. You want to take a stab at that, or you just point that out, or which is a great thing to point out. Yeah.
I mean, there's probably a lot of ways you can kind of. I don't really have to sit down and like write it out and think about it. But.
Sure. Yeah.
I think I might have one way.
Okay.
People getting hit by lightning. The vast majority of people who get hit by lightning die. But there are people who will survive it.
Mm-hmm.
But they're a very low percentage. So by Hume's logic, people can't survive lightning strikes, despite there being several people who have been hit and are still alive.
Yeah, and there's a lot of examples like that people typically bring up to respond to this way of thinking. Is what about the person who wins a lottery ticket? That's very, very, very improbable, but it happens. Do you mean I shouldn't believe it even though it happens because it's improbable? Right? So yeah, that's a good one. That's the one that a lot of people bring up as a response to Hume. Yep.
It just seems like you should look at the evidence for the case, not just dismiss it without looking at the particular, what's the evidence for it, not just say, oh, it falls in this category of unlikely, so therefore don't even look at the evidence for it, right?
Right, and it's the kind of evidence that he's looking for that might be implicit, that we need to make explicit in order to understand what he's talking about and maybe a good way to respond to him. All right, so if we're coming up with, yeah, Jeff.
It seems like based on what he's saying is, the only way he would believe that a miracle actually happened or is possible is that, like if Jesus turned water into wine, the only reason he would believe that something like that is possible is that Jesus did it again and again and again and again, told other people to do it, they did it again and again and again, told others to do it, they did it again and again and again. It just became a common thing where people just took a bucket of water and poured it into another cup and it automatically became pure wine.
Yeah, I think that would be the kind of the criteria that he would need is to have it be repeatable, have it be something that is in our uniform experience of how the world works.
By definition, then miracles could never happen because the criteria for what a miracle is.
If we include miracles are by definition rare, then yeah. Yeah, I mean, if he's right about the evidence for the regular and repeatable is always greater than the rare, and miracles are by definition rare, then yeah, it's kind of a knockout. Like, we're done.
So he has to acknowledge miracles to deny miracles.
Right, it seems like the rules of the game are set up to where a miracle couldn't happen because by definition, a miracle can't happen.
That's why he's so confident. That's why he's so confident that he's right.
That's a little bit of circular.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. It's like
And that's C.S. Lewis points this out too. The circular nature of Hume's argument. So yeah, great job. But then he says, he takes it one step further and he says, look, then when we start relying on authorities, the problem of our knowledge of miracles or reports of things that don't comport with my uniform experience gets even worse. Because now I don't even have a uniform experience of the things they're telling me about. And people can lie and all that kind of stuff. So I've added another layer that makes it more difficult for me to confirm that miracles are possible, can happen, did happen, that kind of thing. So it would be one thing let's just say, okay, Hume, you're right, but miracles are happening every day and I see them. Then he might be able to grant, okay, fine, these things are miracles because they're not laws of nature, but they happen all the time. He might just say, now they are laws of nature. That's one possible route he could go. Sorry, I think I lost track of where I was going with that. Yeah, I'll just move on. I'm sorry, I can't remember where. Talk amongst yourselves. This was going to be where I was like, hey, with Hume's objection, talk amongst yourselves. I think we're actually getting close to the end. So unless you guys have any questions, I'll just move forward. You guys have any questions or comments? Good, okay. Okay, so here's what Lewis says. It says, look, now of course we must agree with Hume that if there is absolutely uniform experience against miracles, if in other words they have never happened, then why they never have. Unfortunately, we know the experience against them to be uniform only if we know that all reports of them are false. And we can know all reports of them to be false only if we have already that miracles have never occurred. In fact, we're arguing in a circle. Okay, so that's one problem. The other problem is, if we try to use what's called the inference to the best explanation, there's different ways that we tell what is the best explanation for a given event that it took place. One is the power, the explanatory power. The other is explanatory scope. And Hume only accounts for one of these, not both. And that's part of the problem. So he accounts for regular, repeatable events, where we can take those regular, repeatable events and draw some kind of abstract law that describes them all. But that's not the only kind of thing that we have to explain. We also have to explain individual events, like the Titanic sank. That happened once, I think. Yeah, just once. Or your birth, or the death of a particular star, something like that. Those things only happen once. If you rule out any possible knowledge for miracles on those grounds, now we have to rule out the possibility of our knowing singular natural events as well. So we don't typically want to go there either. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like the creation of the universe, or the origin of life,
Yep.
or all kind of things that skeptics hold to.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, Geisler talks about Hume and his softer view. You know what? Let me see. Let me go forward here. The other thing, this guy's Thomas. His name's Thomas Kuhn. He wrote a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And he basically said, how do scientific revolutions, or how does science advance? And he says he thinks there's these kind of paradigmatic shifts that take place. New frameworks that people use to explain existing data and stuff like that. He says, look, discovery commences with the awareness of anomaly. So the very thing that Hume points out as being not worth knowing is the very thing that Kuhn says is what helps us advance in science, is recognizing anomalies and then adjusting your theory to accommodate for all of these different anomalies. So he says, look, if Hume is right, again, we are hindering science. Traditional anomalies, yeah. I'm going to go ahead and stop there. And if you guys have any questions or comments or anything like that, we can talk about those. We're almost at 9:00. But I this last part is kind of technical, and some people are glazing over, so I don't want to bore people. Unless you want me to go through it, I don't care. Yeah.
I was actually going to ask if you're willing to keep going, like after.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah, that might be a better way to go. So.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Does anyone want to close this out?